like to think about what we do at Opera Rara and to talk about it as live operatic archaeology. We find a piece, and Mercadante's Il Proscritto is a really good example of this. It was premiered in 1842. Apparently, those performances were quite successful, and yet it then completely disappeared from the repertoire until we at Opera Rara, throughout 2020, began this process of rediscovery, restoration, leading up to what in 2022 will be a studio recording and a live public concert. And in that journey, what we're trying to do is to bring these pieces back to life for 21st century audiences to enjoy. We do that because we think there is something in a piece like Il Proscritto that speaks to today's audience and to future audiences in a powerful, relevant and engaging way. And this seems to be one of the unique and really important and special purposes of Opera Rara, which is to widen the repertory. So much of the operas that we see in seasons around the world focus on a very narrow range of titles. And actually, it's the job of Opera Rara to take these pieces, which for whatever reason have fallen out of popularity, and to bring them back and to propose them to audiences in a way that they will take their place in a wider and reinvigorated operatic repertoire.
So now what everyone is going to want to know is there are these thousands of operas out there completely unknown. So why did we decide on this one? Why do we think it's worth this huge effort of soloists and orchestra? And you were the first one to mention it, I remember. Tell us about it.
Well, I think that one of the things that Opera Rara has to do is obviously to discover new opera, and this is a huge job. It's a huge job also because the operas, many operas since also the beginning of Opera Rara has been rediscovered already. If you think all the Rossini Renaissance, even Verdi, there are various festivals now that were not there when Opera Rara started. So I was looking about the pieces, the operas that and the composers that the Opera Rara have touched on in 50 years of history, and Mercadante was one of those. So I thought, let's just look at Mercadante. And well, one of the beauty of the internet these days is that you can get things digitally rather than have to schlep to Napoli or to Vienna or wherever to look at the manuscripts. So I started to look online, and it's a very long process because, as you know only too well, you're a musicologist. In the moment that you open a score, an autograph score, immediately your eyes go sideways because it's badly written, and you have to check this and that, the different way of writing. Today we write with the vaudevilles at the top, the strings at the bottom, it was different. So there are all these things. But for me, so I've been through many operas, not only of Mercadante, also of other contemporaries. And for me, I am the opinion that if I get bored after 5 minutes, probably the public would get bored after 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. And this opera didn't get me bored. And so I went on looking at this, and then we discussed together because obviously, you're also a musicologist. You have a lot of experience into this, and I think that this opera is very interesting.
Yeah,
and this is why we focused on this one.
I must say, I think I was slightly biased at the beginning by Mercadante's reputation of being a fine harmonist and all those things, but melodically, not the greatest. And I began to sort of playing it through and thinking about that. But actually, the thing that really convinced me was this performance you did on the piano.
I wanted to show something, not only to you but also to all of us at Opera Rara, and that was actually just I was just reading from the manuscript, so I was there with the manuscript, trying to get the harmonies right. But I think there are some beautiful melodies, particularly in the lyrical part, and this example of Giorgio is one of them.
So Mercadante was born in 1795 and died in 1870. So he had a long career, and that was a period of great development in Italian opera. You think about it, he was born 2 years before Donizetti. When he died, Verdi was writing Aida, was towards the end of his career. So, and he was very prolific during the whole of his adult life. So clearly went through a number of different style periods. He learnt, he was born in the South, and he had his education at the Naples Conservatory, which then, I think this is important, thought of itself as in some ways the centre of the operatic universe. And his early operas, no surprise, sounded like Rossini. That was the only way to make a living in those days. In the 1820s, he travelled a lot. He went to Vienna, he went to Madrid, he spent a lot of time outside Italy. But in the 1830s, he came back to Italy, back to Naples, dominated by Donizetti at that period, and started talking quite loudly about reforming opera, making some difference, making his individuality felt. And the way he described this reform was that he wanted to take attention away from the singers, put more emphasis on the orchestra, have a more complicated orchestral texture. One of the things he said, which is quite important, was to take away soloists from ensembles and let big choral movements express themselves more naturally. All of these things, I mean, they actually sound rather like Wagner in all sorts of ways, but were a self-conscious program of trying to find some individuality. The opera that's most famous, as far as this is concerned, is one called Il Giuramento, which was first performed in 1837. Then, in 1840, he became director of the Naples Conservatory, and his output began to slow rather as he had a lot of administrative duties. Now, this moment in the early 1840s is when Il Proscritto came about. And the interesting thing, I think, is compared to the kind of ultra-reform operas of the 1830s, like Il Giuramento, there's a sign in Il Proscritto, and this is what makes it so interesting, I think, because there's a sense in which I think he was rowing back on the reforms that he'd instituted in the 1830s and was trying to bring back a more melodic style into his operas. And I think, we think at least, that the mixture of increased orchestration, complex harmony, but also this new injection of melodic beauty means that Il Proscritto gets a kind of balance that his earlier operas didn't have. So one of the ways, I think, of thinking about Mercadante was that he was always kind of between different traditions. In some ways, he wasn't Rossinian. He wanted to distance himself from Donizetti. He was from the south of Italy, while most of the exciting cultural movements were in the north. And to some extent, I think because of this, time passed him by. His operas dropped out of the repertory at the time when Verdi was becoming the symbol of the Italian nation. So an unfortunate concatenation of events meant that Mercadante didn't achieve the kind of reforms he wanted. But we think in Il Proscritto there is a moment here where he wrote something which is highly individual and can make absolute sense as a contribution to the Italian repertory. I think in some ways, I mean, this reform agenda that Mercadante had was at its most extreme in the mid-30s. And funnily enough, what makes Proscritto so interesting in some ways is that he's not quite reforming as much as he used to, and he's let melody back in and allowed it to develop.
Yes, but I think you know, there is always like this: when you do something, then sometimes you discover that you made the point, so you can retract a little bit. But I was just thinking, you know, for example, you know, looking at the coro of the Proscritti. Now this opera is contemporary, basically, to Nabucco, and in Nabucco we have the chorus, the operatic chorus, Va Pensiero. And when I was reading through the orchestral introduction of this coro of the Proscritti, I thought, oh my God, this must be a mistake, because you know, it was not fitting the harmony, etc. And then I actually realized that it was not a mistake. Actually, makes a lot of sense from the harmonic point of view, but not necessarily if you think from what was coming before or what was contemporary at that point. For example, we can look at the introduction harmonically of the introduction of Va Pensiero and the introduction of the chorus of Proscritti, and are two completely different harmonic worlds, because Verdi, I mean, that is the best chorus ever, but it's actually quite simple. You know, third and fifth, fourth and sixth, seventh, just one, seven, diminished seven, and then it's there. But Mercadante goes much further with the retarded poggiaturas, and he starts in a key and finish in another one. And I think that this was something that, again, it was innovative, was very innovative. And just looking at these two pieces side by side, you can see how much, in a way, advanced harmonically Mercadante was compared to Verdi in that moment.
Yeah, and maybe that was something to do with why the opera didn't succeed so well. You know, that there was, I mean, goodness knows, with orchestras of that period, I mean, the tuning and, you know, how those things might have sounded.
But there is that, you know, I thought about it, because even I, you know, when we discussed it, we thought, this is strange. Now, you know, having looked for the second, the third, the fourth time, is actually not strange. But as I always do, you know, talking for a moment as a performer, when something doesn't come to me the first time, but come to me the second, the third, the fourth time, I need to remember that the public hears it for the first time. So I need to help, in a way, the public to come with me on the journey that I had on the second and third and the fourth time. Yeah. So, for example, if I would perform now Il Proscritto, I would know what to do, but something that I didn't know the first time. And as you know, they probably had 3 days of rehearsals when they did all this opera. So,
I mean, it's interesting. This is, I mean, you might say in some ways a fairly conventional plot. There's a woman and there are two men, and they both love her, and she has to decide between them, and you know, so she commits suicide at the end. I mean, it's conventional in that sense. But one of the things I think that's most interesting about it is the casting, and that probably wasn't something that Mercadante had much control over, but in the end, the two sopranos, one's a mezzo, one's a contralto, and then there are two tenors. There's no baritone or a bari tenor. That gives a peculiar kind of texture, doesn't it, to the whole opera, which I think is one of the most interesting things.
This you're touched on something that for me is really specific to this opera. You mentioned the mezzo soprano, that actually is very difficult to to put in the right in the right name, is a mezzo, is a soprano with a very good first octave, is a mezzo with facility in the high, and the same thing for the two tenors. I actually think that the part of Giorgio is a part for a baritonore. Is if it's too high for a baritone, but if you have a tenore in the real sense of the word, then half of the tessitura you will not hear it because it's really quite low. And this immediately gives to the opera, I think, a color, a certain color, because the voices are what they are, and also there is another thing that for me is very interesting. Mercadante write a lot, and I mean a lot, in tonalità, in keys, with a lot of flats.
Oh yeah, the violinists are going to love you.
Sorry, the violin, as well.
The string players,
exactly.
Yeah,
with a lot of flats, and this again gives a particular color. Even if you say that all the keys are the same, blah blah blah, it's not true. And so this is a slightly warmer and dark.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And so maybe also this one, the lack of bright, shiny keys. Maybe also this one was a factor. I don't know.
What do you? I mean, I'm trying to think of the pieces that most stick in my mind. The thing that I'm most excited to hear. I think the duet for the two. For the two women, the slow movement is beautiful. It's a beautiful slow movement.
But it's interesting that there is not one big aria in this opera. It's not like Traviata, Sempre Libera or whatever. This is not an opera that will be remembered for a particular aria. The arias are nice, but for example, Malvina, the female protagonist, doesn't have an aria. She has a lot of duets. 1, 2, 3, 4 duets exactly.
4 duets,
and then the final scene. The final scene, but the final scene is when actually this is very interesting because it reminds me a little bit of Nabucco.
Abigail.
When Abigail comes in and dies, and the final scene, there are these two men, husbands, in the story that are there with her, but she committed suicide because she doesn't want to be unfaithful to one or the other, and this is also a very good moment. But there is not a real aria for Malvina. There is an aria for Arturo, that is the higher tenor. There is an aria for Giorgio. Giorgio, for example, was a beautiful introduction of the finale of the second act. When he has the duet with Malvina, and this is a huge introduction for harp and flute. Is honestly on the scale, if not bigger, as Lucia. Is interesting to notice how, again, even in this point, Mercadante does not give to the voice. It's not just an introduction, and then there is the aria. There is the introduction, then. Giorgio starts to sing on the same theme, as always happens, but the themes remain in the flute. It just is slightly giving this interjection, this phrases, I lost her, I will never find her again.
He's dreaming.
Exactly, and then it finishes. It's very, 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 very interesting.
So today is a really exciting day for Opera Rara. It's an exciting day because today is the first day that we're doing a live event since our incredibly successful concert with Ermanella Yaho at the Wigmore Hall, which happened way back on the 2nd of February 2020. That's one reason why it's exciting. It's also exciting because today is World Opera Day, and the theme of World Opera Day is Opera Reboot, which essentially is what we see as an opportunity to re-energize, to reinvigorate our operas in a way that they appeal and are really dynamic to today's audience. Today's also the start of our journey of introducing Il Proscritto to a new public. For me, it's a new transition. Throughout 2020 was a period of lockdown, a period of introspection, but also a really productive period when we began this fascinating journey of rediscovery with Il Proscritto. And the singing that you can hear upstairs is tremendously exciting because it's the first time since 1842 that this music has been heard live. And in about an hour's time, we will be presenting excerpts from Il Proscritto to our invited audience so that they can start to join us on this journey of rediscovery and restoration that we're so well known for.